Hello and welcome to the Plastic Circle. I'm your host, Trish Hyde, and today we're going to do a little myth busting with Ed Kosior. Now, Professor Ed Kosior is a plastics genius. Now, that's my words, not his. And he works globally recovering the valuable material of plastic from the waste and creating the circular economy in the process. So, Ed, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Trish. Thank you for inviting me.
So how did you get involved in plastic and what are you currently doing?
Okay, it's a very long story. It probably goes back more than 20 years, but I went from being an academic talking and teaching about plastics to engineers and technicians to actually designing and building recycling plants, because in the mid-90s, I realised that nobody in the petrochemical industry was doing anything about the end of life of plastics, and all this good material was ending up in landfill. And I thought we could do a much better job than we were doing then. And so I put it into my head to become somehow a designer of recycling factories. And I got the opportunity to design one for Visy Industries when they invited me to help them design the first mixed plastics recycling plant in Australia. So it started off from that. And from there, we went to United Kingdom, where we designed a plant there. And once I was there, I literally stayed because there were so many things to do. And there was a lot of encouragement as Britain was addressing the issues of waste. And so we started to develop the technologies that are now in widespread use. So food-grade PET, food-grade high-density polyethylene, food-grade polypropylene, which is not yet widespread, but it's coming. And I can say more about that later. So for me, the big desire was to stop the waste and to bring a new sense of responsibility to the plastics industry, which had it had as its paradigm what we call dig, use, and discard. We'll make more, and someone else will eventually tidy it up. But of course, the tidying up hasn't been happening. We can see that in the oceans. A lot of countries don't have waste management, so they let the material go into the environment with quite severe and long-lasting consequences. So we have a big task ahead of us, keeping our act clean and helping countries that don't have the technology is really where we've been working. So that's the short story. There are many other things along the way.
That's fantastic. That is great. So just a quick one. Who's doing it better in the globe? You know a lot of, country-wise, which countries should we be looking at?
Germany.
Yeah.
Belgium.
Mm-hmm.
Those two. I hesitate to say many others. United Kingdom is doing a better job than it was doing in 2004. They're now middle of the range. But in terms of the big countries like United States are very far behind compared to the level of technology that they have. Big consumers of plastics, but very poor recyclers of their resources. And countries like, as I mentioned, Germany are very good, Switzerland's very good, but there they have very disciplined populations who do the right thing. Now, across the globe, we've got countries like Italy, France, who are doing reasonably well. Spain, not so good. Portugal, not so good. So it's surprising, if you go across the Eastern European countries, they're not so good at it either. Many countries still put all the materials they use directly into the waste bin, a single bin for everything every day, and nothing comes out until perhaps it goes to landfill. Surprisingly, the less developed countries, for example, China, India, Vietnam, the Philippines, they naturally collect the materials of value and they recycle those because people make a living from it. And you can go to many countries where people work under very tough conditions to recycle the valuable materials like PET and perhaps HDPE, but they do little for films because films have low value. And this has really been the problem with plastics in oceans. It's been the low value materials that haven't been recovered. So there's a big task ahead of us to find really good alternatives, and the brand owners need to think really carefully about what sort of products they sell into different markets. What we sell into Europe and what we sell into Australia could well be different to what we sell to Indonesia, which is just on our doorstep. The Philippines, Indonesia's got 1,000 islands. It's a whole series of island states. What do islands do with all this material if they don't have high-tech recycling as we may have in Germany or Austria or Europe? The world's still nowhere near the right level of recycling of plastics. We still have a long way to go.
Fantastic, because that is a perfect segue into the first myth busting, is edge of truth, edge of myth. Chemical recycling is the solution for everything. What do you think?
No, I don't think that's the case. People are looking for chemical recycling, but they forget what chemical recycling is all about. First of all, mechanical recycling can be established in just about every city around the world. Every village, every population can collect material, and then they can actually recycle it in a centre where they might have better investment. Chemical recycling, though, is linked to the production of an intermediate chemical. Now, there are two types of chemical recycling that people can consider. Recycling of materials like PET, where you break it down to the base chemicals, or the other materials like polyethylene, polypropylene, where you break it down to an intermediate oil. And this is really where a lot of people think chemical recycling is. So to do that, you break it down to an oil, then put it into a petrochemical cracker where they recreate the monomers to make the new polymers. Now, just think about that whole process. A new cracker will typically use 500,000 tonnes of naphtha as an infeed. So even if we're going to add 10% of its feedstock, you have to add 50,000 tonnes of oil in there. That will come from approximately 80,000 tonnes of mixed waste plastics. Now, there's no cracker around the world that's doing anything like that. Yes, there are people making oil from plastics, but they also make a lot of gas. What happens to the gas? It's really quite important, because if you're making the gas, you could be flaring it off and creating CO2 emissions. So are you really doing the right thing? So a lot of people don't realize that you have to have a big chemical industry that is willing to take those oils. Now, not everyone is, and a lot of virgin resin companies will not take hydrocarbons that might be a potential risk to their operations. So there is a big issue. It's not simple. People think chemical recycling will save the day. It can do things if there's massive investment by the oil and gas industry and the polymer industry. And we're seeing the R&D, but we're not seeing the end-to-end solutions just yet.
So it's not time to give up on the efforts of mechanical recycling and recovery.
No, we've just started, and we need to be far more vigorous at collecting. Once we collect, we can decide what we have. Some things will be simple to recycle and economic to do so. Others will be more complex. And if we go waste to oil or waste to energy, in many cases, you're doing the same thing. And in Europe, I've been convinced that waste to energy is one of the few solutions that is open to people. I don't love the idea, because ideally I'd like to see the recycling. However, we generate a lot of waste. A lot of the waste is organic and paper-based, and that ends up typically going either to landfill, or it'll go to anaerobic digestion, creating gas, which goes to energy. So if you go direct to energy, it's almost the same thing, and you're dealing with the waste as well. So waste to energy is probably a realistic option, provided it's done in the right way and we strip out the recyclables beforehand. So it's a pragmatic answer. It's not the optimum answer.
And You mentioned organics. Now, one of the popular confusions that I've seen is that disconnect between biodegradable and bio-based, and what all those terms and how that actually impacts material recovery.
Yes, a very, very important point. Many things are bio-based, of course, and bio-based plastics can either be degradable or non-degradable. And of course, the whole point about using the word bio is an attempt to say we're making something renewable. In other words, we're taking from the biosphere, creating something, and it's going to go back into the biosphere again. So we have a circuit, and we're not digging up fossil fuels. So bio-based is a good approach. However, if we talk about bio-based materials, they can be either biodegradable, or they may be industrially biodegradable. So in those cases, we have a real problem, because a lot of people think the word bio all of a sudden confers some sort of magical sustainability for this material. And yet some materials that are degradable require industrial conditions. And even if we can find the right infrastructure to handle those materials, it does take some time and effort in order to do this. Now, many countries have composting, which is ambient conditions, but the composting facilities cannot take the biodegradable plastics, because their worry is, if it's a biodegradable film, how do they differentiate between a conventional plastic, which is not degradable, and a bioplastic, which is degradable? So they basically ban all those materials from entry. And we don't have, in general, a stream that can handle bioplastics. Now, this actually starts to create an interesting dilemma for countries. So what should we do in countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, the Philippines, where there are many people, they're big consumers of packaging? Should we be using recyclable or biodegradable packaging? Now, the evidence is that if we use recyclable packaging, which is durable and long-lived, it will probably end up in the oceans because of the poor waste management. So it seems in those cases, it might be better to opt for biodegradable materials that will have a finite life and then can break down either in controlled locations as a preference, or if they escape into uncontrolled locations, they will then biodegrade. So I think we need a lot of rethinking about what we do in developing countries with less well-developed waste management techniques. And I think we at the moment don't welcome biodegradable plastics and biodegradable packaging onto the market. Yet I think we should make have a new look at this. And one of the dangerous things I see happening is a lot of companies are switching to paper. Now, that sounds like a great option, because we're using a bio-based material. We know that we can harvest trees, make paper, which sounds great. But nearly all of these paper products that are replacing plastics are coated. So they're coated with a thin film of plastic, or they're coated with a wax, or they're coated with polyfluorinated compounds. Now, the last one, the polyfluorinated compounds, are indeed a very worrying emergence, because globally we now have a problem that many tons of packaging are made with fluorinated surfaces that make the material oil and water resistant, which is fantastic. But these PFAs migrate into oily foods, and then they migrate into our fatty systems, into the biosphere. Yeah. So we now have a global problem, and we've heard that Denmark have banned fluorinated treated papers for food packaging. And yet these materials are food grade, but they're very persistent. They don't break down, and they end up creating another environmental problem, a bit like the ozone depleting substances, which took something like 60 before they depleted to the stage where we have healed the hole in the ozone layer. So we have to be careful about the options and where we're changing to. just to jump to something that sounds like it might be better, like a coated paper, doesn't mean we're doing the right thing. Reduction is, first of all, very important to cut out the overpackaging. Recovery of the materials is very important. And then recycling should be the first option. And in this modern day and age, there should be no excuse for any company not making their packaging recyclable. If it's not recyclable, it shouldn't go into the market. Otherwise, they have to say, you know what, this is where our packaging is going to end up. It's going to go to waste to energy. Well, let's make sure they have waste to energy plant in their market, because if they don't, they're releasing something that will last for thousands of years. I mean, these materials will not break down unless they're given a lot of heat and energy. So many things that we need to do.
Okay, so just on that point of recyclability, some people say that everything is recyclable, but that it's just the commercial reality of whether it will be or won't be. What do you say to that?
Yes, ultimately that's true. I mean, atoms aren't destroyed, typically. So you can take the carbon loop, of, say, taking your oils, or taking your plastics, breaking into oils, putting it back into a cracker, and you recycle those. And of course, you have to use a lot of energy to do that. The energy means CO2 emissions. So the thing we have to look at is making sure, if we are recycling, we keep in mind the whole environmental impact. And so to simply say everything's recyclable, then we need to have a look at that life cycle. If we take the case of some of the persistent chemicals released into the environment, things like DDT, so that's recyclable, but where is it? What about all the brominated materials that we use as flame retardants? They're showing up in the fatty tissue of sea life, of whales. And of course, then we hear that Eskimos can't feed their babies breast milk because their mothers have accumulated all of these chlorinated hydrocarbons in their fatty tissue. So, I think, it's a bit of a stretch to say everything's recyclable. It's a rather glib statement because, how will it be recycled? And if these materials are persistent and escape into the environment, then they go through the whole biosphere and at a cost that we sometimes can't predict at the early stages. The best thing is to use what we need and be absolutely sure we're not releasing things into the environment. I mean, plastics are durable. That's their key attribute. The fact that they're durable means we can recycle them. So let's make sure that we have the right technology in the right place. And that's really where NextTech and myself have sort of placed ourselves. We thought, what can we do as bright people to make recycling better, make recycling easier? And as it turns out, it all starts with designing the right sort of packaging, putting the right technology to recover that material. And so we're very clever at that now with automatic sorting, and then also having the right recycling steps. And then the last step is really, really critical, and that is having the products to put it into. So brand owners need to know their product is going to one day come back into the next cycle. And so they need to be buying recycled materials, irrespective of the cost now, because oil has plummeted, monomers will be cheap, polymers will be cheap, and it'll be tempting to switch to virgin and stop recycling. Well, if they create it, they have to create a home for that final material back into a finished product. And that is now their global responsibility. They can't stand away from that, irrespective of price. And, the global CEOs understand it and their procurement people understand it, but now they need to practice it.
That's fantastic. And Ed, I love it. You've highlighted the complexity of plastic. Is there a final single message you would like to share with people that, to give them that little bit of hope that we can achieve the circular economy? What would you like to tell people?
Well, it's as simple as buying packaging that is recyclable in the first place. If you see something that's not recyclable, think about where it's going to go. We should have a red box in our kitchen called, landfill locked away for thousands of years, or we have the big recycling box where it goes into the circular economy. So it really is up to us as consumers to shun non-recyclable materials like crisp packets. We're going to stop eating crisps, but maybe we need to send the manufacturers a message, say, find a way of recycling this, or take them back in the store, or do something. Consumers are at the end of the chain. The only choice they have is what they buy. So if people buy recyclable materials and recycle them, we're doing our bit. But consume less as well. As we're all finding out right now, we have all changed our lives. And you know what? The planet's a lot healthier and a lot better because we have. So consumption's gone down, the planet's healthier and better. Maybe people will be healthier and better as well. So there is always hope, and people are ingenious, and it's by changing our behaviour that we'll create a better planet and a better world.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Ed, and thank you for listening to our listeners. I'm Trish Hyde, and we've been the Plastic Circle. We're casting off. Bye.